In our science take for this week, I want to start and end with a story about my dad. My dad died ultimately of, or what was causing him to get close to dying was a mesothelioma. He was exposed to asbestos back when, around the time I was born, and it caught up with him. And as his cancer became more and more painful and life became more and more miserable, he decided to basically end it, you know, kind of go into hospice. And I'll tell you the end of that story in just a moment. A couple of members of Congress, Anna Eshoo and Adam Schiff, published a piece in the Washington Post recently in which they pointed out that our pharmaceutical supply in the United States is about 90% of all the drugs sold in the United States are generics. Those generics are not manufactured in the United States. Most of them are manufactured in India, actually. If you look on the original bottle you get from the pharmacy, typically you'll see that. But India is not actually making the drugs. What's called the API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, the drugs, those are made in China. And China sells them to India in bulk, you know, like by the pound or the ton or whatever. And then India presses them into tablets and sells them to companies in the United States, which makes it a little bizarre when you hear politicians say, oh, no, you can't buy your pharmaceuticals from Canada because we don't know about quality control. Well, they're all made in India or China anyway. But the point, about 80% of all of the APIs that are used in India are coming from China, and you know, most of our drugs now are coming from India. The point is that this is both a health threat and a national security threat that we need to really take seriously. I mean, Adam Schiff, one of the authors of this, is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. And this was the context in which he was talking about it. He said that if China were to close the door, if China were to say, okay, we're not going to ship any more of these ingredients to India starting today, well, there is actually, this is a quote from Rosemary Gibson. She's a senior advisor at the Hastings Center. She said, and I quote, if China shut the door on exports of medicines and their key ingredients and raw materials, U.S. hospitals and military hospitals and clinics would cease to function within months, if not days. Now, you've got China, massive human rights abuses. The conflicts in Hong Kong right now have the potential to melt down, and the people in Hong Kong who are protesting China's policies are literally waving U.S. flags. You'll recall Tiananmen Square back in the late 80s, they were carrying a papier-mâché Lady Liberty, you know, the Statue of Liberty. They're staking out islands in the South China Sea, which we don't recognize. They're getting closer and closer to Japan. They may come into conflict with Japan around this. They're circling Taiwan and aggressively going after Taiwan, essentially. If any of those things, those are all flashpoints where the United States itself, we, you and I, this country, we could find ourselves in direct conflict with China. Now, if China wanted to resolve that conflict, in other words, make us do what they want, oh yeah, okay, you can have Taiwan. Yeah, we're not, you know, we don't support the people in Hong Kong anymore. You know, forget about the Uyghurs or, you know, whatever. If China wanted to really use this as a pressure point on us, all they'd have to do is say, you know, we may just stop shipping those APIs, those drugs, to India for your generics. And, you know, that's one issue. The other issue is contamination. You know, last year it was valsartan, a blood pressure medication, was contaminated by this compound NDMA, which causes cancer. It's a byproduct of manufacturing processes and making rocket fuel and all kinds of things. And apparently this contaminant is coming from China to India. It's possible it's coming from India as well. We don't know, but it's in one of those two places. And now it's turned up in this drug, the active ingredient of the drug that we normally call Zantac. And so now they're saying don't use this. So anyhow, what happens in the United States if China cuts us off? And that's my dad's story. My dad, when he decided to quote, go into hospice, he did it at home, but, you know, have a hospice nurse come by. He just quit taking all of his drugs except for the morphine that he was on. And one of the drugs he quit taking was his blood pressure medication, which he'd been on for well over a decade. Within 2 days, he had stroked out. He had a stroke. and he was locked in. He couldn't speak. He could hear. He knew everything that was going on. He could move his eyes. That was it. And he stayed that way for 6 or 7 days, unable to eat or drink, until he was basically dehydrated to death. It was a terrible way to die. And but that is what could happen all over the United States. I mean, there's literally millions of people on blood pressure medications. Not to mention all the other drugs. I mean, people with infections, people with heart arrhythmias, all kinds of things that China could just inflict on us. This is something we need to be seriously talking about, bringing manufacturing, not just for the sake of the jobs, back to the United States, but for our health and our security.